But I thought with us here, we've all got our own and really quite different experiences of making track, and we all do it in different ways. And it might be just nice and interesting to compare notes, and it would be nice if we have a lot of questions and discussions and things along the way, I thought. But Mick, you're the one who's really used Easitrac more than any of the rest of us, I think, particularly for points. I wondered if you'd just like to kick off and tell us about your experiences. This is really sort of how we do it rather than telling you how it should be done.
When you asked me to prepare something, I didn't get enough of a chance to do some preparation other than assemble a few photographs, which is what I've done. And it's a bit of a combination of my experience with it, but my experience with it was illustrated in the various articles that I've written for the Turnout magazine since it was introduced. I'll share the screen, and while I'm doing so, I'll give you a little bit of the background. I'll leave it there for a minute to give you a little bit of history, because plastic track in the 2mm Scale Association goes back almost 1,000 years. It started off, I think, before Stuart Hine did the first polypropylene base, which I was a great fan of, in which you dropped the rail and glued it in. And it was plain rail strip then, it wasn't extruded bullhead. That was a great advance, I thought, on soldered track. And I bought loads and loads of it and built Wansbeck Road with it. Later on, we tried to, and I think I have to say I was something of a driver here. I tried to get Dave Lidgett, who was the proprietor of Kestrel Designs. I tried to get him to make a mould for plastic track, just for the plain track, and use solid construction for point work. It's a long story, and it fell flat. We did get some track work out of a mould, but there were so many problems related to how it was ejected from the mould, and the stuff that came out was slightly under gauge at one end, so it was really a non-starter, and that was a bit of a failure, and both Dave and I were quite disappointed that it didn't work. I can't remember when that was. Dave, regrettably, is no longer with us, but he lived long enough for some investigations to take place when I asked Chris Higgs at one of our annual general meetings if there was a chance that we could have some plastic track, because he was the then products officer. And his reply wasn't really very encouraging. And I'd been talking with Alan Smith, who was then thinking about taking over the products job. And we both felt that it was possible to do plastic track that we have now with a shaped chair that would accept rails slid in. We talked a little bit about it, and at repeated intervals we would discuss it. And eventually I was talking to Dave Lidgett one Christmas, because I used to ring him every Christmas. And he says, well, I've still got the mould here if you want to have it. He says, if you want to look at it and say what I did, if it's going to help. And so the mould, the tool, came from Narberth in Wales to Essex. And Alan and Bill Blackburn looked at it. And around about the same time, Alan was talking to a tool maker, and he showed the mould, the tool rather, to the tool maker, and the tool maker said, "Hey, I think I can do something with that." And we moved to get a price for a plain track tool, and the estimate was in the region of £3,000, and we needed to generate that sort of money. At the AGM where it was discussed, which probably would have been a year prior to this event taking place, 3 or 4 people said that they would be prepared to fund it, and at that stage we'd had no idea what it would cost. Laurie was one of them, I was another, Smithy was the other one, Alan Whitehouse was another, and Mark Fielder said that they would chip in. So there were 5 of us, and it turned out we all put in 600 quid because there was a VAT element as well. We put the £600 in, each of us, fully aware that that £600 could well be being wasted. We had no idea we were going to get a product. Eventually, of course, we did get plain track. We sold it as plain track. We used the profit from the plain track to fund pointwork chairs, which are almost as expensive. And when it was finally proved that it worked, the 2mm Scale Association took it on. We got our money back effectively for buying the first mould and the investment for the second mould. And the association got what I think is a perfectly good product, and it just seems to have gone on from strength to strength. Part of that process was making a system that would be good for turnouts, not just fixed radius turnouts as you would get with set track, but something that would allow you to cater for everything that you wanted to. If you wanted to make a double slip and draw it out in 10 plot, then you could, using the system that was developed, using the system that still exists today. What you see on the screen is the starter for 10, if you like to use a university challengism. This is one of the first turnout bases that was milled by Alan Smith. And the idea was to build the track work on top of that, using a drawing if you wanted to, but you just have to compare the drawing with the base. And the chairs that were introduced had no pegs on them, they were just flat bottomed. And we did this specifically because we wanted the system to be so flexible as to enable people to build any configuration or any track geometry that they wanted to do. Because you could also use plastic strip as opposed to the milled base, just in the same way you use point timbering for PCB sleepers. What you needed to do, of course, was to secure the base to something. And my method of securing the base, not everyone's, is to use a sheet of clear plastic glaze. This you see here is double-sided tape, just keeping the base down. These are 2 pieces of rail. On the left-hand side is a piece of bullhead, which has just been snipped with a pair of side cutters. And you can see that at the tip, it's squashed. There's a little bit of extra rail on the top because the cutting has squeezed out excess material above and below the bullhead, there and there. There's also a bit of overspill into the rebate of the bullhead there. And the idea of the photograph is to impress upon people that you need to get rid of that, and get rid of the bit that's in the instep and make it smooth like that. Because if you don't, when you come to thread rail through chairs, you mill the inside of the chair, and they're very small to start with, and if you mill something off the inside, you're virtually guaranteed to destroy it. Here's the chairs that I was talking about. They are quite small, untidy fingernails, but you can see that there is an inside part of the chair and an outside part of the chair. This sprue here, and I'm sure most of you will be familiar with them, is another £3,000 worth to do the tooling. They've come out rather well, if slightly smaller than the production plain track chairs, but they still are all usable. We decided on I think it was 8 ordinary chairs, 2 slide rail chairs, and 1 check rail chair. This meant that for about 12 sprues you could build a turnout. This is the technique to remove them from the sprue. I'm going to start and fly along now. You just simply thread them onto the stock rail in the correct order, so you have to do a little bit of calculation first. Thread them onto the stock rail, and then once those are all on, you start to make the common crossing. There were a series of jigs made, and they're still available, so that you can file the angle correctly for the common crossing. Once you file the angle, you stick it in the jig. That's the angle that was used for filing. This assembles it, and you solder up here and release it from the jig, and you've got a crossing. Anybody have any idea? Because there's some trick questions here. Which way that point is going?
Main road is on the bottom.
Into.
Your main road is
Yes,
on the bottom.
correct.
Yeah.
This is the point rail. Yeah, that's the point rail, and that's the splice rail. You'll see some glaring errors now that you know what you're looking at in a couple of shots time. This is a jig that Alan Smith developed, which didn't become subject of the manufacturing process, because you can actually do this with a pair of pliers, and that was an awful lot of trouble to go to just to put a piece of rail in and get a nice neat bend, which you could easily get wrong. This is part of the common crossing, which you'll see in a couple of seconds. But that jig, I've got those brass pieces with me. They've never been used, and you'll never see anything like that in the shops.
Mick,
Yes,
what's the orange material?
it's a plastic.
Is it tough, Noel?
Well, I don't think it's tough now, Laurie.
Oh, he likes perspex and stuff, doesn't he, Alan?
Yeah. He's made me electro jigs. This is the original material that was used to make the jigs. The current ones, certainly the common crossing assembly jig, which is what we're looking at now, they are made from aluminium, which are something of a heat sink, but the backs of them have been milled away, so it's less of a heat sink than it was when it was first introduced. But these are the originals that were made. You can see that bend there is the little bend that the two pieces of brass were forming. Again, it was just a bit of guesswork, and pliers do the job just as simply, just as easily. These are the common crossing rails that are all in. And here is a guide, or our guides, to where you solder pieces of scrap etch to make the thing a substantial construction. Well, substantial construction. There you go. I've got them soldered on there, and that should now lift out of the jig and immediately become recognizable as a common crossing. These need to be cut off, and the little bends, and there's mixed schools on the amount of bend at the end of a flange weir. That forms part of the common crossing there, and this gets cut off around about here just to be twisted out. That's the same picture showing the reverse. Just digressing slightly, the turnout construction uses a lot of jigs. I say a lot of jigs, a selection of jigs. Alan makes all of these, and this is one based on one of Jeff Jones's designs, and this is the Switchblade filing jig. You can see there's A, B, underneath there is C, and that's D. They represent A, B, C, and D switches. And once you've arrived at which switch you want, and I think this is for a B switch. I worked that out because when you put the brass piece over there, D is still available, so that's a D switch, and it alters the angle at which this filing implement lies on the jig itself. And all it uses is a piece of emery paper, and that is it in use. And you can see the angle that it creates. That gives you a very, very clean planing. I think that's the best way to describe it. To get a very clean planing to the side of the blade, which mates with the stock rail.
I have to say very quickly that I was really sceptical of that jig, particularly just the use of emery paper when I first saw it. But I had a go with it, and it's really good. I was really surprised. It works really well, and as Mick said, it gives you a really nice, clean, regular angle on there. No, it's really good, really good.
I think it was 5 minutes. 5 minutes to make or to get some semblance of a switchblade, which looked really rather professional. And like you, Jerry, I was very surprised and a little bit adverse to it, because I was always used to using a self-healing cutting mat and files. But I thought after that, I still use it today, whatever kind of track work I'm building.
Yeah, no, likewise. Yeah, I was really impressed with that.
This is the stock rail, and these are the check rail chairs. These are ordinary chairs. Next picture shows how using the milled base. One of the questions that I asked myself when I was putting the first one together: how on earth do you know where to put the common crossing? You're going to fix it in place, and then you'll discover it's in the wrong place. And how do you get yourself out of that situation? And the answer was really quite simple, and all you had to do was build one to discover how to do it. And you simply put a straight stock rail in. This is the Deluxe Materials pin floor, an excellent tool for dispensing small amounts of solvent onto tiny chairs. The right hand side there is a piece of Easitrac, and just a little word about Easitrac. People keep writing Easitrac, spelling it with a CK. It was a trademark name to avoid being offending anybody else who got anything in the model trade, and we decided to leave the K off. So the correct way to write it is Easitrac with a C only. But here's some Easitrac, and it gauges the stock rail to that common crossing. And the common crossing, as you can see, is not fixed. It's not even got any chairs on it at the moment. It's just simply sitting in there being gauged, and this side of it is being used to gauge where it's going to sit. At this point, you can move this common crossing up or down, or to the right or to the left, or whichever way you want to describe it, so that you can get the right fit on the milled base. And it's as hodgepodge as that. It's as simple as that. You really need at some stage to work out where the curved stock rail is going to go. And this perhaps explains the next shot. Where's that gone? This is me putting some chairs onto the common crossing. This gives you a clue as to how to alter the position of the common crossing. These chairs are actually glued down now, but they weren't at first. This stock rail was fixed in place. The common crossing was then able to slide up or down with a piece of Easitrac on the other end, so that you could check that your curved stock rail wasn't going to drift too far that way or too far this way. Like I say, it sounds a little bit hodgepodge, but once you've made one of these, you realize that flexibility is valuable, and it works. I mentioned a little bit before about bending the check rails and the flange rails. This is a pair of 2-pound pliers got from Squires or some such, with a piece filed out that's about 0.5 millimeter thick, which is an easy job then to get hold of a piece of rail while it's in the point and just tweak it, and you can bend those rails over quite easily without destroying the point. This is a switchblade with chairs on ready to go, and the switchblade is quite simply placed in. You sometimes have to bias to get a little bit of a curve, which involves running it through your fingers, and once you've got that in, you can then also check that that is in the right place just using a roller gauge. And this is the thing almost complete. Still missing a check rail over there. You can see the bridging pieces on the underside of the common crossing. It's all really very simple. Has to be for me.
It may be the
It was surprising how easy it is. And what I've said to people, and I continue to say to people, what stops you from building something like this, and I would imagine it's the same with absolutely everything, and it doesn't just apply to model railways either. What stops you from building is your head.
I say
If you make,
I say
sorry?
I say
Well, that plays a part, I know, but people generally find that once you make your mind up to have a go, and you get rid of that inertia, you start to, goodness me, I can do this. It's possible. I've always said, Dave, if you can see it, you can model it. Well, if you cannot see it, you waste your time. Anyway, different even watch the news. I know there are a million different ways to do tie bars. Well, tie bars were examined by the group, or the Easitrac consortium, the 5 of us. It was mostly Smithy and me, and we worked out a system for fixing tie bars in place, which it's fairly foolproof, I think. I've used these tie bars quite often, and well, exclusively now, and they work, and you can power them from just about anything once you've got these in place. It consists of etched plates onto which you solder the switchblade. The switchblade has this soldered to it with a pin going through. The pin drops into a hole. Yeah, you can probably see the holes there and there. And that means that the tie bar can move, but there isn't any stress on the moving part because it's sitting in a hole, and there's no fixing at all to it. This is a jig to enable you to solder the switchblade to the etched plate. You can see there, you will in the next shot. These are chairs sitting in pre-drilled holes, and that's a recess into which the etched plate sits. This is how it's set up before you solder it. The facing edge of the switch is butted up against the half etch lump, sorry, the thickest part of the chair, or the chair plate, and that's treated with a generous blob of solder, making sure that you don't get any behind there on the flat of the etch. This is one soldered up. Gets a little bit pixelated, but I'm sure you get the idea. The back side of that blade, which is going to mate with the stock rail, has to be perfectly flat, and that's where the jig assists when you're filing the switchblade. And the etched plate has to have no solder that's crept underneath, because otherwise it'll stop the blade closing nice and neatly against the stock rail. Couple of things to say in this shot. You can see I've filed away a little bit of the excess solder, and if you look at that, there is a little bit of solder there which I've removed, but you still get a nice close fit. I've filed away the solder from the top of there, so you're not going to get any fouling of the flanges. And how big that hole looks, it's really quite small, but the operating mechanism, a bar or a rod comes up from the baseboard, from beneath the baseboard, through what can be something as small as a 5mm diameter hole, which means you don't see it either end, and you can use a Fulgurex, a tortoise, or a servo to power the blades either way.
What's that black plastic tie bar made of, Mick?
It's another Turnout type material.
Right.
Alan would tell us, but it is Turnout type. It doesn't react to the soldering iron. Although if you stick a soldering iron on it and keep it on it, it'll probably distort it. But it is quite tolerant, and it's not.
I haven't done anything on tie bars in the few photos I was asked to put together, but that's essentially the same as the tie bar I use, or albeit I use an actual sleeper.
Yes.
But having pins come up through onto little chair plates,
Yeah.
so that there's a little bit of pivot, so you don't get that strain on the joint, is basically what I use. And for the moving sleeper, I use a PCB one, albeit not one of the association ones. I use a piece of fiberglass, which is much stronger, and I solder a little BA washer underneath the hole, which again beefs up the joint. And I've not had one break yet. But it's broadly the same. It's broadly the same idea.
You can perhaps see here. This is the extension of the chair plate.
Yeah.
And it's just you can just see it there on the other side. This is what prevents the switchblade from riding up above the height of the stock rail. So you should never ever get any lumpy bumps as things go over the turnouts.
That's a really neat little tie bar, that one.
It is. It's. I've got it on Callerton, and I've got the test one that I built, and it regularly performs. And it, like you say, they've never come undone because there are some moving swivel parts which aren't subject to wear. The part 2 of this image is to illustrate to people how you can strengthen the switchblade area of a turnout using brass sleepers. That's quite simply a brass sleeper which looks exactly the same, and it should do because it's cast from these plastic sleepers or acetal sleepers, and you just simply gap it in the middle, drill a hole either side, put a pin through the baseboard right the way through. It not only holds it in place, but you can feed it with current from below the baseboard, so you don't have any unsightly wires visible above the board. That system of brass sleepers is, I think, valuable if you want to maintain the overall nice appearance of the plastic track. Here's another example of using brass sleepers. This is actually Callerton before it got anything other than track on it. And this illustrates a couple of things. First of all, there's a brass sleeper there, and there's a brass sleeper here. And what you get from this is I'm going to feed both those with current, but instead of having to fill a hole with filler, I decided I would put the sleepers next to each other, but not joining and not kept apart by a filler or a piece of plastic. I would just cut the nylon or the acetal sleeper from the track base progressively shorter until it was a lovely snug fit up against its counterpart brass. And that's a much easier way to do it, less fiddly for cutting through a brass sleeper and then having to fill the hole. The other part of this is the turnout is built with bullhead, and this is flat bottom, and that kind of thing does happen on the real railway.
Yeah, much more likely to happen that way around, Mick, because I think they converted the plain rail to welded quite in advance of doing the turnouts very often, didn't they?
Yes.
I've got quite a few pictures of the oval stations where, in fact, some of the plain track is a mix of flat bottom and bullhead, but all the point work is old bullhead.
This is another example of how brass sleepers are in use. Anybody who's seen Callerton could recognise this immediately, because this is the trap point that I put in, and it has the second version of cutting brass sleepers. This is quite simply to stabilise the switch. This switch was added in later. That's the switchblade there. Same tie bar mechanism there, although I think at this stage it might not be. I think the tie bar is in there, but it's not working. This doesn't do anything to feed, because the feed comes from further back. But what it does do, a dab of solder on there and a dab of solder on there, which even now can't be picked up, can't be detected, carries the current across into the switchblade. This is again flat bottom joining bullhead. I did try and get some flat bottom bases cast, but it turned out to be just as easy to file the chair away and just do that with solder, and that's what I did. So that's the transition between the turnout and the road that goes up towards the terminus. This is a different beast, of course. This is a peg chair turnout. I won't do anything on peg chair turnouts here because there's been articles written in the 2 Mill magazine, and there's a full set of instructions on the 2 Mill website. And this is reverting to the original turnout that I built. This is just another example of how to feed the common crossing. 2 separate brass sleepers, again cut so that it matches an Easitrac sleeper. Much easier to do that than trying to put a whole brass sleeper in. But there are 2 points there, two pins you'll put through, so you're feeding the common crossing twice. And if you do that, it should never ever fail. And at the back, there are 2 sleepers also, but gapped in the old style by a gap in the middle to give the switch a degree of strength. This is where a lot of people choose to put PCB sleepers, and it's horses for courses. PCB sleepers are easier. You just slide them under and solder them and you've got a stable switch. PCB sleepers here are easier because you slide them in, solder them, and you've got a stable frog feed. The common crossing also, a lot of people put PCB sleepers in. I've never done that. It's not been necessary. Once you get a plastic point laid onto the baseboard surface and get it ballasted, it's never ever going to fail unless you stand on it or mistreat it. In normal usage, they're never going to go wrong. Having said that, Alan Whitehouse and I built a layout at Rail X, and I built 5 of them in the first day, and subsequently they did need surgery. But to my delight, the surgery was able to be performed, and these things were able to be almost dismantled and put back together after they'd been in the baseboard, painted and operated. You can't do that with soldered track. You've got to just about take the whole thing up. As I said, horses for courses. The more I use plastic point work, the more I like it. Here is just another example of feeds. This is Wansbeck Road's extension, years and years old.
Mick,
And this is, yes, go on.
do you actually solder the cast sleeper to the rail or not?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It might not be possible. There were times when what I did was I used to just put a pair of pliers. Again, you have to adapt them because otherwise you're just going to squeeze the rail. But if you relieve the inside jaw of a pair of pliers so that you can grip the chairs, you can just squeeze it and squeeze them together. That's one thing you can do, but I think that would give you a suspect electrical connection. So I always put a bit of solder on, you know, a hot iron, and make sure you get a good soldered joint there. If you ever need to take it out, there is a simple way. You just cut the rail, both sides of the sleeper, put your iron on the sleeper, withdraw the little piece of rail, and then withdraw the other part from the plastic sleepers and insert a new piece of rail. And I've done that before as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you.
I was going to say something else there, but it's gone out my mind. I've forgotten. That's where it finishes. As far as plastic points are concerned, I am a plastic track devotee, but that's not to say that I don't do soldered track as well. For instance, the project I'm working on now doesn't use plastic track at all. It doesn't use chair plates at all. and I'm ballasting the track with paper and cardboard as I'm going. I'm using PCB sleepers, and I'm still getting a representation of the chair and daylight beneath the rail, because I'm using an old trick that John Wright taught me years ago, soldering bullhead rail to plain sleepers and then grinding away the PCB either side of where the chair would be, thus making the sleeper thinner, that's right, thinner, and giving the appearance that the rail's sitting higher above the sleeper, while also taking the sleeper level closer to the top of the ballast, which is what I want. I'll have some more pictures of that kind of track work eventually, but there's some unconventional point work that I'm building, which will also be subject of articles at some stage.
There's various things on your new project that are quite revolutionary, Mick, and at some point it'd be great if you could give a presentation on the whole thing to the group, because I shan't say any more on it, but I've heard from one of your co-conspirators on that, and it's some really interesting stuff on that, so I'd love to see a presentation on it at some point.
Well, you will do, but there's still a lot of experimentation with it at present, but it's coming along well. It's coming along well.
Your new project with that sort of idea to grind down the sleepers to elevate a chair out of them is news to me, and I'm interested to see what comes of it, Mick.
Yeah, I remember seeing John Wright do that with a layout. I think it might have been the Wylam one. Would that be right, Dave? Can you remember Wylam?
Yeah.
John used to solder this is when he was modelling in, I think, EM, because that was what Wylam was. He would solder it direct to the PCB and then laboriously, because this layout was about 25-30 feet long, laboriously grind every bit of copper clad away from each sleeper, leaving a representation of the chair. And I thought, you are mad. And here,
I've always said this, Neil.
30 years on, I'm doing the same in a smaller scale, so I must be crackers as well.
Talking about going mad, Mick, I was really pleased when you brought Easitrac out, because I think I'd done about soldering 1,000 chairs on sleepers for Fencehouses. And I know Bob did a lot more than I did, but after 1,000, I was ready to give up any secrets I had. I was just mind numbed. You know?
What I have to say is that if you speak to Smithy, he'll tell you the project couldn't have come to fruition without me. And I disagree with him, because I'm quite certain that the project was a non-starter without him, because Smithy did the design, he's an engineer, he did the work, and he had the contacts. I maintain I was simply the mouth that tried to get the association to do it at first, and then because of the support that Smithy and I got from Laurie, Alan and Mark, it came to fruition. And it was just a question of the people and the events occurring at exactly the right time. So it was definitely a joint effort. And similarly, Alan and I could probably have not done it without the financial assistance that Laurie, Alan and Mark gave us. But it seems to have gone from strength to strength, as I say.
Just say
It's
thank
brilliant.
you for the lump sum.
It's brilliant stuff. It's brilliant. And Smithy he's a really clever engineer, and a huge asset to the association, I think. Really is.
There it goes. Here endeth the first lesson, Laurie. I don't know how long that took.
That was great, actually, and a big reminder for me, because, as you know, I don't use that much plastic in my point work, and it's made me look at it again and perhaps reconsider. I have to say that the plastic that I've done in the past, really, as whole points, there were one or two there, it felt very flimsy when it came off the template, but once it's down, you're right, it's absolutely strong and rigid, and the milled bases certainly give a lot of shear support to it, don't they? And they sort of stop it parallelogramming, if that's ever a word. I'll have to have another look at the tie bar too.
The actual base of the template, what's it held down with on the plastic, on that plastic sheet?
It's
It looks like
double-sided. On that one that with pictures were taken, it's double-sided sellotape. But if I was doing it now, I wouldn't use double-sided tape. I would just use Pritt stick.
That's strong enough, is it? Oh, right, right.
Well, you can use Pritt stick and some thick card, something like that's plastic card, but you can get cardboard that thickness from Hobby Time.
All right.
As long as you, well, if you're building peg chair turnouts, you need to cut out where the screws would go. You need to have 2 holes where the screws to fix the common crossing go,
Right.
so that you can keep everything flat. But that's covered in the instructions on the Turnout website. But certainly, piece of cardboard will do it with Pritt stick on, because Pritt stick's easy to release.
I was just going to ask you that, Mick. How do you release it? Or how, when you had double-sided sellotape, how did you release that? Did you have to slide a knife under and gradually ease it up?
That's an old 6-inch rule, Laurie, with a sharp end ground onto it.
Right.
And it just slide it under and just ease it up.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where if you glue it down or you put the sellotape down, put the build base down using double-sided sellotape, and first time you'll use too much sellotape, and you think, oh, I'm not going to get this off. It's going to take forever. And yet, just a bit of patience and tap, ease, tap, ease, and it'll come up in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But
any solvent that's unattacked plastic will do it. Because I use double-sided tape. I got a picture when I do my half dozen pictures in a minute, and bit of white spirit or something like that. If you just slop a bit of white spirit round, that'll dissolve the glue of the sellotape and won't touch the plastic, and then it will lift off and clean up really easily.
That's useful, Jerry. I've never used that method, but I will do.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, that's quick.
Mick, is the Easitrac height the same as PCB track with sleepers and bullhead rail? Do the two match up height-wise when you butt them together?
It was designed. It was designed to match with chair plates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With PCB trackers or PCB sleepers, I think 0.8 of a mil, aren't they?
Yeah.
0.8 of a mil deep, and the Easitrac up to the sleepers, I think, are 0.8 of a mil, and then you put a chair plate on, and they should match. That's how they were designed, anyway.
They do match, because I've done it extensively. Yeah.
That's good to hear.